Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King. Thank you that we could all gather together tonight, whether it's in person or across the miles. We thank you also that you're here among us, and we pray that we all might learn more about you this evening, and that we might then be stirred to serve you more completely in our everyday lives. Thank you, B'Shem Yeshua Meshachim, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
Amen. Okay. Then we're ready to begin. How do you want to begin here? Well, you had mentioned there might be a topic you want to start with.
No, I didn't say start. No.
Oh.
What I meant was there might be a topic we could talk about that would only be the beginning of the discussion.
Oh,
We have some separate questions that we can answer actually they're not that long to answer. Unless one of us goes on. Oh, she has a question.
I have a question.
I see that hand. We have a question here in the audience.
People in the audience get precedence.
Yes, they do.
I didn't really understand the story of Job.
Job.
Yeah.
Very good question.
That is
Why did God allow Satan to torment Job?
the question is why?
Yeah.
Why did that have to happen?
Yeah.
We're not gonna, no, don't hand it over to me.
You were the one that teaches it.
Don't teach Job.
I thought you didn't get
No,
you didn't?
no, I don't do Ketuvim. That was the late great.
No, which section of Ketuvim did you teach then?
I don't teach any sections of Ketuvim.
I'll show you your folder later. We divide Ketuvim in half and you taught one half of it.
I taught Daniel, but I did not teach
Oh, you didn't
Job.
teach Job as part of that?
No,
Well,
I
okay.
haven't taught Job. I haven't taught Psalms. I haven't taught
Oh.
Proverbs. What other things do you want to know? I have never taught.
Okay, no. All right, so then you taught Ruth and Esther and that part of it.
Yes,
Okay, fair enough.
but I teach them in historical books.
Yeah.
Ruth and Esther.
Okay,
I don't teach them in Ketuvim.
okay.
Never really taught a class in Ketuvim.
So anyhow, on Job.
What about, no, do not aim it at me. I've never taught it.
All right.
And we might want to wait for that until a little later tonight.
Oh, okay.
Because that is going to involve a lengthier answer.
Okay.
It's not just well, here's why. It actually involves quite a lot of philosophy and figuring out. And then there would be different takes during different time periods of history. Because believe it or not, Bible interpretation can change down through the centuries. And methods of interpreting scripture can change down through the centuries, depending on what experts are being followed. So the meaning behind Job, you could possibly have a 2-week seminar on that. But I think we can get to it a little later. But I think maybe we should do some of these.
All right. Well, then because of people present, let's start with that.
Okay, yes, then we can do that. Because if people are going to get mad at us and turn off the show, then they could do it right at the beginning. Yeah. Because, some people that we know very well might get mad at what we think about this topic.
Is present company exempted?
No, not you guys. You're not going to, I hope you're not going to be mad at us. No, I don't think so. I put money down saying that none of you is going to storm off in a huff and slam the door. So we're pretty safe. And if they do get up and huff out of the room and slam the door, then we can handle that.
Okay.
Why are you staring at me?
Okay. Question reads, why do you say to those well-meaning people who say you have a more personal relationship with God if you receive the gift of the Spirit and are able to pray in the Spirit, and that second time Spirit is in quotation marks, in other words, tongues, prayer language. I know the New Testament speaks to these gifts, and I know there's a difference between, quote, speaking in tongues, end quote, with an actual interpreter and then a quote gibberish end quote language.
That's not our word.
That's why I'm reading and
Uh-huh.
quoting. That you use to pray privately where where the Holy Spirit is praying through you, as I understand it. I've seen some real abuses with this gift in quotation marks. And frankly, the whole thing turns me off. But I want to be sensitive to the fact that these gifts are biblical. Thanks. Okay, very good question with at least, I think I counted 3 parts in there. All right, do you want to address it in general first? Just asking?
No, you start.
Okay, then, first, receiving the gift of the Spirit to be able to pray in the Spirit. 2 important things to understand right away. Frequently, this gift called tongues is associated either with being given the gift of the Spirit or with being baptized in the Spirit. And those are, in the biblical text, 2 different things, but often in the conversation, one or the other or both are brought together, if not somewhat overlappingly or discussed or actually intermixed with one another. So, to start with, who is baptized in the Spirit? It will take me a little bit of time to find it, but in 1 Corinthians, I think within the first 6 or 8 chapters, and I'm thinking probably around chapter 6, the rabbi there says to the Corinthians, and to whom he's saying it's going to become important. He says to the Corinthians, have you not all been baptized in or by the Spirit? The Greek term there can be translated either way. The assumed answer to that question, the way it's said rhetorically, is what?
Yes.
Yes, you have all. Now let's take a look at the Corinthians to see what kind of lifestyle they had, to see if baptism in the Spirit was related to something lifestyle oriented. Read through the book of Corinthians and you'll find one excess after another addressed. Whether it is improper behavior when they're celebrating what's often called the Lord's Supper or communion, whether it's improper behavior concerning what goes on in a worship service. You'll find that discussion in chapters 11 through 13, possibly up through 14. Whether it's improper behavior related to interacting with one another, chewing people out for not living up to your expectations. That's addressed largely in chapter 10. Some sense of, I think this is again around chapter 5 or chapter 6, people having inappropriate physical relationships with family members. When you look at this particular congregation, it's not a congregation's behavior patterns that you want to follow.
They were a very troubled place.
Yes.
This church was very troubled. It was not doing well ethically or morally.
And yet, to them or about them it is said, have you not all been baptized in the Spirit? So if it doesn't have to do with the concept of what we would call spirituality or Torah-regulated or related behavior, what does it have to do with? It has to do with something that happened in their past. And the only thing that happened in their past that all of them participated in was their entrance into a family relationship with God through Yeshua. So the giving or the gift, the baptism of the Spirit then occurs at that point of entering into relationship with God through Yeshua. There are a couple texts in the book of Acts, and the actual references don't come to mind readily. And if we had more time, I would hunt them up for you, where it talks about the Spirit coming on or baptizing people when they acclaim Yeshua as the Messiah. This happens in a couple of cases in the book of Acts. So that means the baptism in the Spirit is something that all believers in Yeshua have gone through. Not will go through, have gone through. The concept or the metaphor of baptism has to do with, if you take apart both the term and its related terms, has to do with the idea of identification. And a related term to baptism, you'll find the Greek term very hard to understand. It's baptizo. How do you translate baptizo? Well, you just take one letter for Greek and give you the English equivalent, and now you end up with baptism. Baptismos is a noun form. So it's not really a translation, but whatever, for whatever. In Jewish circles, when a person converted to Judaism, the last step prior to offering a sacrifice at the temple, the last step was going through the mikveh, or what we now call in many circles baptism. Why? Because that was the ultimate sign of identification. What did this particular process involve? You went down into you call it the mikveh itself. You went down into the mikveh tub. Natural
Barrel?
back.
No, a laver.
No. Laver is a different issue.
Laver is very
I'm
shallow.
talking about what you actually go down into the
Tub.
mikvah. Yeah, but it's not tub as we envision it.
Like a swimming pool shape.
You can envision it because you were there.
Yeah.
Matt, who contributed, can envision
small
it because he was
swimming
there. Yeah, a mini pool. Thank you. You go down the steps into it as one person, a Gentile. You come back out of it, what? As another person, a Jew. And by the way, it's an interesting way of then picturing born again too. Which, by the way, in Jewish background, in the Jewish contexts, had the connection. There was a born again connection with the going through the mikveh, but again, it's another story. So anyhow, it's the idea of identification, becoming part of a specific group of people. It was used the same way in the community of Qumran. So when we became identified as part of the people of God through Yeshua, that's when we were baptized. And I was going to say re-identified. I don't know if that helps or not. Okay, so is that understandable as far as the use of the term baptism with respect to the Spirit of God? And it was the action, apparently it's the action of the Spirit of God. Big surprise. Yeshua said in John chapter 3, you're born of water and of spirit. It's the spirit birth that's involved there. So that's when baptism takes place. Everybody had it. Now, all the Corinthians had it, but all the Corinthians did not have the gift of tongues. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Do all speak in tongues? The rabbi asks.
And here your answer is no,
Yeah.
because there's a list of things.
And then he says-
Does everybody do this? No, not everybody does.
Yes, and there's a list of, I think he actually lists about a dozen there. So, is it associated with the gifting of the Spirit? No. Now,
Not in that context, no.
no. No, I'm sorry. Thank you for saying that in that context. Is it associated with the gifting of the Spirit? Yes, in the broader context. But baptism has one purpose. The giving of gifts by the Spirit has another. And again, I think it's 1 Corinthians chapter 12, right around verse 13. The rabbi says, the Spirit of God gives gifts to all people as he chooses. As he chooses. So it's not our choice. So there is within some movements, religious movements, almost a sense of obligation is you have to get the gift of tongues if you're going to be truly spiritual. Well, no, you don't have a choice in the matter. It comes at the discretion of the Spirit of God, and it's not given to everyone, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Now, what else did I want to bring in there? Also in 1 Corinthians 12, Uh, At the end of the paragraph, it says, are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, workers of miracles, do all have gifts of healing, do all speak in tongues, do all interpret. And he then goes on to say, but eagerly desire the greater gifts. So the gift, the speaking in tongues is not listed as one of the greater gifts. Earlier in that chapter, beginning at verse 12, he says, these gifts or these giftings have a specific purpose. Ephesians chapter 4 says something very similar, and that's so that the body or the community of the followers of Yeshua can be built up one by another. And he says, are all eyes in this body? No. Are all hands in this body? No. Each makes its own contribution. So when you're talking about the body of the Messiah, the community of believers in Yeshua, when you envision that by way of metaphor, it's not one huge globby eyeball. I was going to say it looks a little like me. Hopefully it doesn't look a little like me at all. But anyhow, it's the idea of a body. So you can see that there are multiple giftings with multiple purpose, but the main use is to build up the body. Now, where did I want to go from there? Oh, that's right. And one can't say to the other, by the way, I don't need you, or I'm more important than you. That's in the middle section of 1 Corinthians 12. And then he moves on from there in chapter 13, right as it begins with that famous chapter. One of the things you need to seek for is love. In other words, it's not a gift, it's how you use the gifts you've been given. Also in chapters 12 through 14, he talks about the use of the gift of tongues. And he says, you shouldn't, if you have the gift, you should not utilize it unless there's someone there to interpret. Because otherwise you're just babbling into the unknown as far as your listeners are concerned.
It's all about your internal state, your personal internal state. That is all about. It's not about helping other people or assisting with the work of God in the universe. It's about what I feel right now in my heart of hearts, which is not the topic of any of those gifting passages. The gifts are always used for others. That's a dirty word nowadays. Others.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I almost use that as a springboard to something else. It is appropriate that, but I want to couch it differently than immediately popped into my mind. So yes, it's not all about me. It's not all about who I am or what I get to do or don't get to do. It's about what I can do for others. And we've talked, and that came up as a subject in last week's Drosh, and I think the Drosh before, as part of the subject matter of Drosh, compassion, reaching out to others, not addressing my own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, if I might pull a phrase from somewhere else. Okay. So what is the gift of tongues? First time we see
In the Bible.
Thank you. And then I want to talk about it outside too. The first time you read about it in the Bible, most people turn right away to Acts chapter 2.
See, it's here.
Yeah. And that's a lot like, to take a text from the pop quiz last night, that's like saying the first time you read about the just shall live by faith is Romans. No, the rabbi is quoting far earlier, and he's quoting one of the mighty prophets. Since you took the time to come back a second night, I will give you the answer to that one. Habakkuk
Yeah.
2:4.
Your favorite prophet, Habakkuk, that you've never heard of and don't know how to pronounce that name. But Habakkuk is a great
Yeah.
prophet.
So anyhow, the first time we see it in its splashy form, so to speak, in Acts chapter 2. However, and you find a reference to this passage in the 1 Corinthians 12 to 14 block. It comes from Isaiah. With people of other tongues and lips will I speak to this people. And in the context of Isaiah, you want to take it there, or do you want me to continue?
I don't know what. you're
Okay,
gonna
in the
say.
context of Isaiah, it's a prediction of what will happen to the people of Israel. They will be, God will get a message across to the people of Israel with people of other tongues or lips, in other words, of other languages. Who were the people who took first Israel and then Judah captive? Two different groups. Assyria
Assyria.
and Babylon. And when they came, guess what? They did not come speaking Hebrew. They came speaking a known language. So the reference in the Corinthian text and the background for the Acts 2 text is the story from Isaiah, which speaks about what? Unknown tongues? Not in the usual sense of the term. No, a known language. It was
Different language.
different language.
Different actual languages spoken by other people.
Spoken, that's the key term, spoken by other people, which other people could understand.
Could be translated.
Translatable. That's the Isaiah text in its context. Therefore, it needs to inform the Corinthian texts, and it clearly informs the Acts 2 text, because what happened? All of a sudden, these people who come from various parts of the world to celebrate Shavuot show up in Jerusalem, and now we have the inner circle of Talmidim or disciples, and they are speaking in tongues. And it says every man or every woman heard what was said, what? In their own language.
They didn't have to understand Hebrew or Greek would be more commonly spoken at these holiday gatherings, because Greek was the international language at that time. Latin was not the actual language being used by the vast majority until the 4th century. So Mel Gibson was wrong. We have no evidence that Yeshua even knew Latin. He might know a few. If the guards yelled words at him, he might pick up a few words of Latin, but that's not what the people on the street were speaking. If you didn't know people in Jerusalem and you came from out of town, you would speak Greek to them.
Or if they came from the eastern part of the empire, you might speak Aramaic, right?
Yes, I think by this time Greek really had taken over.
Even over
Yeah,
Aramaic.
because anything Semitic, would be low class.
Yeah.
Any Semitic language like Hebrew and Aramaic would be a low class language. Who wants to speak those? Not me. But the world class language
Would have been-
and the modern language that all well-educated people know is Greek. By the way, if Yeshua talked to Pilate, they were speaking Greek. Because if Yeshua is speaking Hebrew and Pilate doesn't know any stinking Hebrew, and he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
I know that sort of opens up some people, they never thought about it, but these practical situations, you see it in the book of Acts when everybody from all over the world comes. And that's the beauty of the New Testament. We actually have the words that they're speaking. They're not in translation. They were speaking in Greek to make sure that everybody in the crowd, whether they were from way, way north, way, way south, remember they had Jews coming from Africa in those times. They had Jews coming from the far north, maybe up as far as Eastern Europe, and the common language they would have would be Greek.
Okay, so more of the setting. Now, now you can understand why in 1 Corinthians, the rabbi says, if you're going to speak in a tongue, make sure there's someone who can interpret it. And in fact, it makes no sense to speak in a tongue. Remember, tongue now means a foreign language. There's no reason to speak it unless there's somebody in the audience who would know it. Now, if you were in Corinth being a center, can we quickly point out what Corinth is?
Well, if you can, then they can't see it.
Okay.
It's too small.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm looking at the map behind
It would
us.
look like your earlobe, so.
Okay, so my earlobe, no. So it might have use in a place like Corinth or Rome or Ephesus or some of these other centers which had synagogues and then far later churches involved. But anyhow, needed an interpreter. At Shavuot, you didn't need one because it was the crowd that heard it in their various own languages. So it's a known language that can be translatable. And so when it says interpret, understand that the term interpret means they're not giving an interpretation of what's being said, but simply providing a translation for what was being said, what Patrice said earlier, which is very strategic. Because I don't know that I've ever heard a discussion on tongues where they talked about it being translated rather than interpreted.
Well, because that word, in a certain way, is two sides of the same thing.
Yeah.
But an interpretation in modern English, an interpretation is something where you're adding your own little spin on it. Well, that's your interpretation, but my interpretation is this. But translation is more of an exact science, for lack of a better term, where translators should agree with each other. In a perfect world, translation should agree. They don't have to be the same, but they have to agree.
Yeah.
And interpretation, you put a spin on it, and that's modern English. I'm not sure that's the same in Greek, since the original language of Corinthians is Greek.
Yeah. I'd have to check that out in a lexicon, but certainly in its contextual use, what is often translated interpretation should be translated translation. Okay, now there are still a couple parts to this. Good.
Okay, I was hoping we could move it along.
I'll try to move it along. Often this spiritual language, or as he talks about it, describes it in the beginning of 1 Corinthians 13, either a heavenly language. I think he used heavenly language rather than spiritual. We often, in the conversations down here, talk about it as spiritual. Let me deal with the heavenly language first that's expressly addressed in 1 Corinthians.
Because if I understand it correctly, I'm sorry.
No.
If I understand this kind of viewpoint that we're speaking about, they would say, well, I know it's not a known language, but it's my personal prayer language. Yeah. And that is often what you hear. And it's often discussed at length when whoever's in charge wants to convince you that you too need to speak in tongues. You guys too. And unfortunately, many, many people within that movement, they're very quick to say, no, you have to. You have to do it. Something's wrong with you if you don't want to do this. And they give you the hairy fish eye, which is not cool. That is so not cool. Anyway, go ahead.
No, perfect. And in fact, just to build on that just for 30 seconds, often they'll try to help you
you have to
learn how to
this is great.
speak in
it's
tongues.
Great.
If this is a gift of the Spirit that the Spirit bestows at his discretion, then how am I going to have the arrogance to assume I can teach you? And if it's a gift of the Spirit, then it comes from the Spirit, not from my teaching you. Okay, so praying in the Spirit or this heavenly language. I will ask you a question. Heavenly language, that would apply what? To people like God himself or the angelic hosts and so forth. When the angels do interact with human beings, what language do they use?
Something the person will understand.
Of course.
Yes.
And
the answer from the audience was something a person would understand.
yes. And in the biblical text, the people that are being spoken to are being spoken to in what language? Hebrew. If you want a heavenly language, then learn Hebrew. Having said that, the language of prayer in a Jewish context is what language? Hebrew, of course. In synagogues around the world, the language of prayer is Hebrew. In Judaism, the language of prayer is Hebrew. The people of Acts, a good chunk of the people in Corinth were Jews or Gentiles who had associated themselves with the Jewish community. For them, the language of prayer is Hebrew. Okay. Is this the Spirit of God praying through you? I would hope, if we understand the concept of Kavanah correctly, and if you don't remember what it's all about, the last 20 or so pages of the Siddur talk about various things, including Kavanah. If we're involved in Kavanah properly, then it would be the Spirit praying through us, but not in concepts or language we don't understand. But it will be with the earnestness and sincerity, the focus, the intention. Well, that's part of Kavanah, of communicating with God or expressing either my anguish or my gratitude to God. Does that make sense? So, and Romans does seem to at least suggest something like that, but it's really talking about if I can't put into words what is really concerning me, the Spirit of God in me, in that sense, communicates just what's going on inside.
If all you can say is,
Yeah,
that gets communicated.
perfect example. The text uses, I think it's in Romans, groanings which can't be uttered. In other words, I can groan, but I can't put it into words.
It's too much to put into words.
Right. So then, final thing. Since the questioner, and rightly so, talks about these people as being well-meaning, I don't want to denigrate that at all. Most of these people, although maybe misinformed, are certainly well-meaning. And if they're well-meaning, then what's going on in sincerity in those who supposedly, and I've got some good friends who do this, speak in tongues? I would simply suggest that they're verbalizing something that they feel, deeply feel, hopefully, or they are in some sense expressing their emotions. I had never thought of that until I heard a guest lecture at the seminary that two of us attended. And he was a sociolinguist as well as a theologian. And he suggested it is, for these people, it's simply an emotional expression, a legitimate emotional expression, hopefully of legitimate emotions. But as he said, it has nothing to do with the gift of tongues or the gift of languages.
Because you can have what's called ecstatic utterance.
That's exactly
This
what
is
it's called.
professional term for it.
Yeah.
You can have it within mental illness.
Mhm.
You can have it in various cultures of the world where they like to go into ecstatic states together. So this is not just strictly, this is only one type of person does this. No, that you can find this around the world in non-religious situations, and there it's just part of human behavior. It's not, we would never say, well, no, I can't say never, but in general, 99% of the time, we would say it's not satanic. And that was part of the problem. So when you have, I'm going to talk about Christian believers. So when you have churchgoers and they learned about what's called Pentecostal theology, and all of this is in the realm of what is considered Pentecostal theology. If you've been discipled within Pentecostalism, if this is the church you went to, then when you heard others saying, well, this is satanic and God could never use it, well, of course you're going to have a reaction that's horrible, because why would you do this? Put them at odds with one another. And John and I have been in the union, and it's 2-to-1. So for every congregation that's like ours, you have two that do everything in the Spirit. And so we had to early on, we like to classify ourselves as we are not Pentecostal or charismatic, whichever term you want to use. That used to have a distinction. back in the 70s, there was a big distinction. Oh, no, I'm not a Pentecostal, I'm a charismatic. And this is us going, okay. And now anymore, I think it's interchangeable. If I get it, I don't often have these conversations. We just keep quiet. But here's what we do know. Were you basically done?
Yes.
Okay. Here's what we do know. Let me give you an example. So, as part, not all, it's not the driving focus of our congregation, but the congregations of Messianic Jews in the Union, particularly, we all agree that having a congregation is in and of itself wonderful. In the beginning, there were a lot of Messianic Jews, especially those who came out of churches. Remember, they were in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 60s. There was no Messianic Judaism. If you were Jewish and you all by yourself came to believe in Jesus for whatever reason, there was no place for you to go other than a church if you were to learn more. And then with the rise of Messianic Judaism, we found that in the beginning, especially, they came, our congregation people came, our Bible study people came out of churches. They were Jewish believers who were in churches because there had been nowhere else for them to go. And so when we entered into having congregations, many congregations saw as their prime number one example to be a witness to the Jewish community. That was their prime number one reason for existing, not to worship God in a way, but we're showing them that it's possible to do this. We ourselves might not ever pick this, but we're just being a witness to the Jewish people. Well, you can see where that somewhat falls apart after about 2 years. If you don't have Jewish people coming, how good is your witness, kind of thing. But here's what we also know, and I still heard this. So Messianic congregations establish, they get there, and they expect these new ones. They expect the Jewish community to just come on in every Friday or Saturday. They just come on in. And here's what I've heard. Well, and this is a woman who has experienced this. Well, they come in for one night and then they never come back. Well, why don't they come back? It breaks my heart. And it was not appropriate because there were other people and we were in a very small area. So I could not go into it, but maybe someday I will get a chance. If average Jewish person walking down the street comes to your synagogue, what will they see at your synagogue? How will the people act? Will that Jewish person feel like they can fit in with what you're doing? Or will they feel like, I don't want to be here? And if they come in and they see, instead of Jewish prayers, they see half an hour to 45 minutes of dancing to guitar music with tambourines around in a conga line out throughout. And then they sit down and then they just put together stuff that sounds good in English. And they say Baruch Hashem, which means praise the Lord. But they don't know one other thing that's Jewish. And they hear mumblings all the time with their extemporaneous praying. And people, are so overcome that they get on their knees. Do you think Jewish people enjoy that and that will attract them and that will draw them to your synagogue? Because that's somewhat crazy. It's somewhat crazy to think that would be attractive to your average Jewish person on the street. Now, everybody knows somebody who's Jewish that came to the Lord in a wild and wacky way that you would never predict that could happen. But our job as a witness, quote unquote, to the Jewish community and how complete that witness is, it's a very slim margin of what can be doable and effective is the Jewish stuff. That's what will help Jewish people feel comfortable and attractive, or attracted to what you're doing is the Jewish stuff. And so that is a struggle. I think it's a struggle in the Messianic movement. It's the elephant in the room. Actually, it's the great blue whale in the room, because there have been various ways of explaining this concept away. But the concept still remains that Jewish people will feel comfortable if they see authentically Jewish things and not stuff that was made up to, they think it's Jewish. That, boy, I guess my sermonette is done, but do you understand? It's one of the tragedies, I think, in the Messianic movement, that they don't realize how they're coming across, because they knew one Jew who was attracted by this. Well, the other 5 million Jews are not. So, your exception to the rule does not prove anything. And then I've even heard, well, dancing is Jewish. Yes.
Yeah.
At a Jewish wedding, nobody likes to dance more than we do. We love to dance. Jewish weddings, play whatever kind of dance you want to do, we'll do it. But not at a Shabbat service.
At Simchat Torah.
Simchat Torah, yes, that's a good Shabbat service or a good service to dance to. But how do you come across, even a non-Jew who comes in, an average person walking into Target right now, and they come to see you? What will they see? Is it something they want to find out more about, or is it something that they want to run away from? And I think that's trying not to be something that they're running away from, because that should tell you something about your witness, which may not be that effective. Does that make sense? Trying to say all those things without being personally judgmental, but just in general, it could work, but I don't think it's going to, because that's the type of belief that people make fun of.
When we started this particular Messianic synagogue, our co-founder, Dr. David Bronstein, put it quite bluntly at one of probably at our first exploratory meeting as to whether we had a group of people want to do this. He said his vision was something that was authentically Jewish, rather than being just surface Jewish.
Rather than saying Baruch Hashem and singing songs in Hebrew.
And what Patrice has sort of unwrapped for you is the difference between what can be just Jewish, surfacely Jewish, as opposed to what is authentically or through and through, all the way through Jewish. Why? Because we're Jews, or those who have joined this particular Jewish community to live and worship in this particular fashion. And as in Second Temple period and earlier, Gentiles, going all the way back to the Exodus, all the way back to Abraham, that I think of it. Gentiles were always invited to participate and to go on. So now, when you talked about the great blue whale, were you using that as a springboard for the other question?
No, it's just that I realize that if you use the phrase the elephant in the room, sometimes the elephant is not quite a big enough concept, that you needed something way bigger than an elephant. And isn't that the great blue whale? Isn't that the one that's bigger than any creature in the whole universe?
Yeah. What is the biggest creature? It's a whale of some nature.
That was blue.
No,
No, but it's blue. Something blue.
I think the great blue may be the largest of the mammalian.
It's like as long as a football field, and I'll look it up on Google. You can Google it. You all have the internet machine, and you can Google largest creature on there.
All right. Actually, we should go to the Job question before we get to the great blue whale.
Yes, we should. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna keep this short mainly because we haven't studied. So, see, when we study, then the answers get way too long. But when we don't study, we'll just give you probably enough that you can look yourself.
Hopefully so. Yeah.
Hopefully.
And hopefully the first question made sense, because I don't remember the last time we talked about that. It's been years. And
I took a whole course in just Job.
No, I was talking about the previous question.
Oh, the previous question. No, we're not allowed to. Well, that's one of the topics on that. No, not at the union. No.
I don't think we have talked with anybody about that particular topic this century, which means
That's true.
Which means this millennium.
21 years at least.
So if some of that, I apologize, if some of that seemed a little scattered or fragmented, it's because we hadn't talked about it for years. But yes, You had a whole course in Job, you were saying.
I had a whole course in Job, and it was a good course. And my teacher, Dr. Archer, one of the world's leading experts on the Tanakh, and just brilliant person. And so in that class, I'm just going to say this, it's not what,
Can I say how brilliant he was?
yes, he's going to now brag about
Okay,
our
we've
friend.
got a couple books of his. And he was a friend. In fact, he was on the board of one of the ministries we're involved in, so we did get to know.
His wife is cool too.
He knew fluently, what was it? I think 20 some languages.
I was going to say 12, but I don't know.
I thought that was
He never bragged about himself. I
Anyhow,
worried about from him.
either a dozen or close to 2 dozen. He knew them fluently. He kept them current by doing his devotions in a different language each month.
So 1 month he was doing his devotions in Icelandic. You can't make this stuff up, really.
Yeah, he was a very interesting guy. He knew all of the Semitic languages. He obviously knew Greek. He had a degree in Semitics. He had a degree in classics. He even ended up with a law degree. And I think he graduated, if I remember right, from all of, I'm losing one, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So,
Well, enough bragging about our friend.
yes, so this is the guy we're talking about. So Job taught you Job.
He taught me Job, only professor, and actually only one of the few people with it. They're saying the translation here is wrong. I would literally cross out what was there and write in what he said to write. Have never done that. I just remember doing that. It was blowing my own mind while I was doing it. I'm going, no, I need to save what he's saying about this, because if it's really this that he's saying, it gives you a different spin. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, were you going to say more about Job?
More about Job.
Yeah.
Job. Well, we'd have to go through the whole first chapter, sort of to see the setup, right? I'll look for it. Or let me look for it in this Bible.
Yeah, go ahead. Look for
Okay,
it now.
I'll look
You've
for it.
already marked these.
Well, you can start if you want.
Okay. Yeah. Patrice mentioned in the introduction how at different stages of time, different books have been interpreted different ways, which reminds me that in a real important way applies to Job. We are not sure when Job was written. Was it written before Moses? Was it written before Abraham? Was it written after Moses? Even perhaps after David? We aren't sure. It seems.
I'll add to this. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead and say it.
Well, because Job sacrifices on behalf of his children. That's one of the indications that this is a very early book. It's before Moses. Back when you had families were sacrificing on behalf of themselves. So it's early. So that's a first thing to remember. It's early in the story of human beings compared to Moses. So.
Some have argued that it's prior even to Abraham, and I would think that there's a good likelihood it is. Who knows how close to Noah it might even have come. So but that's unknown. Then you've got the story itself. The opening chapter sort of sets the scene. And I think in trying to understand what's going on in that opening chapter, translation differences may make a difference here. You remember the setup, and it's been so long since I've looked at this.
I got it.
Okay, go
I
ahead.
have it right here.
Give us the setup.
Well, Job 1 starts with, there was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of perfect integrity who had feared God and turned away from evil. So that's verse 1. It says about he has sons and daughters. Verse 5, whenever a round of banqueting with his family was over, Job would send for his children and purify them, rising early in the morning to offer burnt offerings for all of them. Well, that was him offering them this is before the time where you had to go to a priest. This was before any of those times. This is where your worship is a family thing. And then it starts in chapter 1:6. One day, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Hasatan also came with them. The Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answers him, "From roaming through the earth and walking around it." And the Lord says to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil." So this is like verse 8 of the whole book, which extends to 30 some, doesn't it?
I thought
Chapter.
that's 40 chapters.
Okay, you want to, so you want to give them why this is important?
No, go ahead.
No. Yeah,
No, you go ahead.
what, really?
Set the stage, yes.
Okay, so the question is, and this is another time where sometimes people feel that, why did God set up Job to be tempted and punished by Satan? Is that what it is? Remember this, how do I put this nicely? This is not a historical document. This is not describing actual maybe events. It could be describing actual events as far as we understand them. But when you're discussing a topic which involves, quote unquote, the sons of God and Satan having a conversation with the God of the universe, right there, we have a lot of metaphors right there. Okay, so in my mind, and this is the only way I can state this, I think God is pretty confident that no matter what happens, Job will still worship him. That's not an attitude you usually ascribe to God, because he knows the end from the beginning. In fact, if he wanted to, he could have just like foreseen it himself and not make Job go through it. But this is written not as a historical document, as I said, but as instruction for us to see what kinds of horrible things can people go through without cursing God. Because that's the ultimate goal. Remember, what does his wife say when all their kids die, believe all their cattle die, and then he gets a skin disease? I mean, it just is one after another after another. His wife says, "Curse God and die." Okay, very good. Helping him out, emotional situation. I think the idea is, even if this kind of horrible thing happens, which probably is not going to happen to you, it does happen to certain people, but maybe probably not you. Then if we look to Job, we see that, and then he has to argue with his friends. That's one of my second favorite parts of this book. His friends come to him one by one, and they're very encouraging. No, they're not. No, they are not. Do they sit with him and help him and hold his hand and read nice psalms to him? No, they argue with him. So this is adding, what do you want to say? It adds insult to injury. I mean, literally. And none of the three of them do any good or have helpful arguments. So what do we the reader learn from this? Well, these are the type of arguments that people bring up in these situations, and they're terrible. They're terrible. Anything to add here?
Keep going,
Okay.
unless you're done.
Well, I'm at a break point.
Oh, I thought you were going to elaborate a little on that last statement, which is very important. If you look at the consolation, and I put that in quotation marks, that Job's comforters, also in quotation marks, provide to him, as she said, there is no consolation or comfort at all, but they are very similar to what is often presented and has been down through the years, as she said, to people who are going through difficulties and trials of all sorts. And if I might summarize one of the comforters, if you only had more faith, have you heard that one before?
You don't have enough faith. That's your problem.
And other similar kinds of statements are made by the three comforters. There's a fourth comforter who comes along the way. And at the very end of the book of Job, God calls out the three comforters. And in fact, he says, they have misrepresented me. The fourth one is that Elihu.
I can look it up.
By the way, it is, I checked, it's 40 chapters long.
Yeah, it's 40 chapters long.
40 chapters long.
And what I read to you was just chapter 1.
Yeah. Apparently, what he suggested to Job is okay by God. And his main line of response, call it consolation, is, look, who are you to blame God or to think you know better than God? In that he was wise. And then Job, after that, Job then interacts personally with God and basically asks the why question.
It's Elihu.
Elihu, okay, I did remember that one correctly. Okay, asks, in effect, he's not talking to God, he's calling out to God, and he's issuing his complaints and his anguish and his questioning. And it's interesting that at the end of Job, God does not answer Job's questions. He does not tell him about chapter 1. He says, in effect, who are you as a human to question the God who created all things? In other words, he's saying, look, you've got to trust the one who knows far above and beyond and better than you do. And he, in fact, will take good care of you. And did God take good care of Job? Well, what's the end of the story? The end of the story is Job ended up with twice as many possessions and replacement kids. So in effect, Job ended up with twice as many kids. So Job's faithfulness to God was in fact demonstrated through the worst and most excruciating of circumstances. But as a result, he got to know God better. And as the closing chapters of Job indicate, he actually had a conversation with God, so to speak. God talked to him, explained who Job was, explained who God himself was. And then God said, yes, when you follow me, there will be rewards. Now, we may not see all of them here because the psalmist deals with that from another perspective, but we have a God who is faithful to his people just as Job was faithful to his God. So the rest of the book of Job, in effect, answers the question that Hasatan raised, or the accusation Hasatan made. Look, take everything away from him and you'll find
He only worships you because he's getting things.
getting things.
Because he's getting goodies from you. But if you take away the goodies, will he still worship you? And Hasatan makes the bet that Job will not worship him if he takes away all his happy things.
But God knew Job well, and that's what you get in the first chapter. And the rest of the later 39 chapters show that God did know Job well, and that Job was as described. He was faithful to God through the worst of circumstances, and even when his friends gave him real lousy advice.
One of the friends is big about don't bother God with your stupid questions.
Yeah.
This is an annoying God when you ask him these questions. Ooh, is it so? You just have to make a leap of faith.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've heard that too.
Yeah.
You just got to trust God, and it's said in such a flippant way.
Let go and let God. That never meant anything to me. I didn't even think it was particularly clever. I suppose there are people who try to manipulate events around them. And that's what they're not supposed to do, the manipulation of events so that it turns out the way that they want. I'm not exactly sure because I've never sort of been that person. I cannot identify. There's other things I identify, but not that. But it just, it sort of cracks me up. The big picture is one of the friends who's giving good advice to help Job. And he says, don't bother questioning. You're just making God mad. Okay, next, bring in the next friend kind of thing. But I also think, and this is where Job, the lessons of Job, and not seeing it as a historical document. Because then, if you see this as a historical document, then what happens in it only applies to Job. And if you come at it with a different set of overwhelmingly bad circumstances in your life, then, well, that's what, maybe he won't do the same thing for me. I think part of the reason Job is in here is to show us this is what God can do for you. Is even though things have all been taken away, he will restore all these things. Will you see it in this lifetime? No, you might not see it in this lifetime. But then again, it's not for no purpose. I think another one is that God has no purpose in doing this.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just,
There's no
it's all
purpose in doing it, yeah.
coincidences. So God's not involved in this. Well, the book of Job doesn't teach that either. It says God knew that this was going to happen. Well, why didn't God stop it? You might say. And in that sense, a lot of the issues brought up in Job apply to overwhelming catastrophes like the Holocaust. Where is God when the Holocaust is going on? Why? He could have stopped it any day, but he didn't. But the answer, which is, it's a non-answer answer, it's an explanation, is that human beings cannot really understand why God does things. I mean, we can have little tiny examples in our own personal life. So I realized that God did this because so this would happen. But in a cosmic sense, why did God even create the universe? We can't even fathom a question, much less the answer. In other words, it's beyond what we know. And on those giant questions, we can't really know, I don't think, in a good way. But I want to know. Okay, then become an astronomer. There are, maybe it's just getting older too. There are things that happen in our lives that sometimes we see the reason for it, and it becomes very clear. That happened to me in high school. I even figured that out in high school, why some things happen and some things don't. You're going to have to take over in a minute, but that's okay if I don't understand why today, or even next year, or even in 20 years. But that God sees it all. And it will all come out the way he wants it to come out. Is that fair enough?
And if you look at the story of Job, ultimately it was for Job's good. So the book doesn't talk about someone who was tested by God. It talks about someone who was, if you want to put it this way, tested by his circumstances and did not allow his circumstances, like I said earlier, despite very poor advice, did not let his circumstances get the better of him, and ultimately did express his concerns and his anguish to God, and God then comforted him. Appropriate question, appropriate discussion for this time of year, because what are we just going through? Our Haftarah portions are the Haftarot of comfort, coming mainly from the book of Isaiah.
Mhm.
That even in the most difficult of circumstances, we've got a God who is there and a God who watches over us. He doesn't remove the circumstances from us. He did not resurrect the kids. He didn't heal the kids. He didn't prevent Job from losing his fortunes or from getting sick. And, like we said earlier, if you have enough faith, you won't get sick or you'll get healed immediately or whatever. No, that's not what happens here. You've got a God who walks with you through this. Please remember that a few weeks ago we finished off the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers is the people walking with God. Yeah, in the wilderness. But really, if you look at some of the key texts, it's God walking with his people through those experiences. This is just another, perhaps the prime example of God walking with his people. And as a result, Job gets a far bigger and deeper understanding of God out of it all. And therefore, his relationship with God is that much closer. I've forgotten exactly how the book closes.
Well, so all this goes on in the 38 chapters that we're skipping over specifically. Job has these afflictions. His friends come one at a time to tell him what they think the answer is, or to yell at Job. And
42 chapters, I'm sorry.
42 chapters. God does finally show up himself, because there's a section after the three friends come where God is really Job is really asking God deep questions. Like, why are there stars? Why are there trees? Why are there what's up with this? So he's asking, what is the purpose and where do I fit in the purpose of God? Why am I here undergoing this? Yoo-hoo, anybody talk to me. And so finally God shows up, and that's in chapter 38. So we've had 38 chapters of what's going on with Job. And a hint about the end, which I wanted to put in. It says, this is a very famous verse where after 38 chapters of poetry, it says, then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. So God appears not where you can see anything, but I assume you see the whirlwind. And if you or I tried to tell people who'd never seen a whirlwind what that is, well, it's a big whirling, and it touches things and it can break them, or it can tear down houses, or it can affect the weather and the rain. I mean, and you just start blathering. And so when God shows up, what the form he takes is something that even the form is something that humans cannot really explain. And even when weathermen try to explain it on TV, they don't know what the whirlwind's going to do next, frankly. We think the hurricane is going to go up over here and then make it, but they have no clue what's going to actually happen. And I think that is a big hint also as to part of the nature of God, is that he's overwhelming and we can't really explain him. And that's the introduction to the conclusion of the book. Does that
Yes.
sort of introduce?
Yeah, and here's the closing couple paragraphs. Job now responds to the Lord at the beginning of chapter 42. Here's what he says to the Lord. I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me. You said, listen now and I will speak. I will question you. Job is saying this to God. And he's quoting what God said. God, you said, listen now and I will speak. I will question you and you will answer me. And then Job says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. In other words, he got a real glimpse of God. And then,
Or as much as anybody wants.
at that, yeah. After the Lord had said these things to Job, he then speaks to the three comforters, not to Elihu, and he chews them out. And he says, you bring offerings and sacrifices. And Job will pray for you. And if I accept Job's prayer, I will accept your offerings. And Job does pray for those people who misused him. And because of that, God forgives them. And he did all of that before he moved on to this second phase of his life, where what we would call the blessings came.
And blessings returned.
Return, thank you. That's a better way to put it. Because it's God's, the text says God made him prosperous again. And what's interesting is, and all his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before, who had abandoned him, by the way, came and ate with him at his house. They comforted and consoled him over all the trouble that had been brought on him. And apparently he had some, how should we put it? They brought him gifts. I don't know why. Had some sort of, he undoubtedly had some sort of impact on their
He
lives.
needed a household shower because he'd lost everything from his home. I don't know.
Whatever. So that's the story of Job. Do we have more to add on that?
No, is that enough for you to get going on? It is worth reading if you like poetry. It's not happy poetry, but it's the most philosophically oriented book because the questions it's answering are really more philosophical questions than theological questions. What is my purpose? Why are human beings here? What's my specific purpose? What was God thinking when he created human beings? You know, those kinds of questions are philosophical questions, more than, well, why did God make me burn my toast today? You know, that'd be a personal rather than, but you see, one is just a bigger version of the other. You know, what's the first cause in philosophy as a discipline? The question was always, what is the first cause? What was the first thing that happened that in the end created the earth and created human beings and created me? So that first cause, and this deals a lot with why did God create people? What was his purpose in creating people? And therefore, how do I personally fit into that purpose? So these are big questions that cultures throughout the world have asked. In fact, you'd have to say probably that, at least for Western people, from Western civilization, that's one of our primary top 10. Why am I here? What am I supposed to do? So it doesn't deal with the answers to those the way modern Western people would. It's not specific enough, but it does show us the type of things or comforts that we should give other people when they're going through things. Well, and that was one friend says it's sin in your life.
Oh, yeah.
Repent.
That's right. Forgot
Repent.
about that, yeah.
And that is the number one worst thing you could say to somebody who's going through something that seems to be, it's really not their fault. It's not because God hates you and is allowed Hasatan to. No, God loves you and he believes in that you can handle the storm. And in the end, I believe you can handle the whirlwind, Job, because I am the whirlwind. Just pretend you're in the Wizard of Oz movie and you're Dorothy's house. And you're that must have literally been what it felt like to him. But a lot of these questions and answers involve our understanding of the Holocaust and the same kinds of answers, which are really not answers. They don't explain anything. We don't know the explanation is what I think one of the messages is. We may never know the explanation of why. Every now and then we do, but usually for big giant events, why was there a tsunami in Japan a few years ago that broke down one of their nuclear power plants? I mean, why did God allow that? Was that Hasatan? Or was he punishing the Japanese? What's going on there? And it's the same kind of questions that Job is asking. Any other enlightenment?
No, just the commercial that you now brought to my mind the second time. The main thing is, Book of Job enables you to better face your circumstances when there are unanswered questions, but also, if understood correctly, enlarges your concept of God. And that's ultimately what God brought about in Job's life. commercial. An attempt to answer the question, where was God during the Holocaust? I did an article on this for a Jewish journal many years ago, and it was simply called God After the Holocaust. It's accessible either through the journal, which has a very profound name, Judaism, or you can find it on the Menorah Ministries website if that's of interest to you, but it's a tad philosophical. So there we go. I don't know that we can get involved with Jonah.
Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. I can answer the question quickly. I can't give an extensive answer, but I can answer it quickly
We could do that, or we could do
Casey's-
it now and then build on it.
if more information is needed. So one of the quick questions that I thought we were going to get to,
Well, we had to work through Job.
what was,
Tongues. It's a good thing we didn't do Job in tongues. Okay, that just occurred to me.
are you going to start in Hungarian with
No.
us? Because I'm not qualified to start in any language very much. All right. The question was, what was the Leviathan? I love that swallowed Jonah. So in Hebrew, that's just a Hebrew word that they brought into English. I guess the King James people just left it.
Didn't know how to count.
So who or what swallowed Jonah? And in Jonah, when you read the Hebrew, and it's simple Hebrew at the beginning or during that part, it says the sailors threw Jonah overboard. I won't even get up to the why that happened. But anyway, trust me, they needed to do that. They threw Jonah overboard, and it says he was swallowed by a great fish. In Hebrew, here are the words: great fish. Great fish. Now, so I've read, I knew that earlier. But, and that isn't, if you want to find that, that isn't the end of Jonah 1. The Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah. It wasn't Leviathan. Leviathan is the Hebrew term for Leviathan. And if you go to the Jerusalem Zoo, which you can, if you go to Jerusalem, you go to the Jerusalem Zoo. In the heat, it smells rotten. I wouldn't recommend it in the heat of the day. It smells bad. But anyway, they have a cage marked Leviathan, and it's an alligator. So that's what modern Hebrew labels. So Leviathan, as far as we know, there's one at the beginning of Amos. He discusses in poetry. It's not like that actually happened, but he's saying the sea, and you might call it the sea monster. And just because Hebrew as a Semitic language qualifies about almost everything that can swim is a fish. So a seahorse, a fish, a jellyfish, a fish, even though they're not fishes. They're not. We all know they're not. And they knew they're not. But anything that swam in the sea is a fish. And so a giant fish obviously had to be big enough to swallow a human being. Just the idea of that, just think about that, is wild and crazy. And even back in the olden days, back in the previous century, stories were put in different things about how whaling, sailors who hunted whales, they would accidentally fall overboard, or the wind would blow them overboard, and they could be swallowed. And finally, the whale that was big enough to swallow a person would spit them out, because they finally identified them as they don't have teeth in that traditional sense. So they're not into like chomping on things. That's not how they process their food. It would spit them out. And when the sailors would, crawl to shore, however they got on the shore, they were bleached white by the digestive juices of the giant whale. I think anything with teeth would chomp on them. But see, they don't have teeth. They eat plankton. And plankton are almost microscopic fishes that just flow in their mouths. And they're able to digest them. They don't chew. So this is, I think, an important way to make this make sense. Remember, back in the 1700s and 1800s, this was a book of nonsense. It was a myth that was so stupid. Why would anybody believe this? This can't happen. Poo, 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 poo. And that's when you started hearing stories about, yeah, it can happen. You can be swallowed by whales. And then there was somebody in the past couple years,
Yes, just recently.
and they said where it was from, and they said how it happened, right?
Yep.
Did you say that story?
No, I didn't,
But I
unfortunately.
bet if you Googled that story, how man swallowed by whales lived to tell the tale. And he was also bleached. He was very pale. Because if you have digestive juices or the inside of a stomach, you might be massaged by the stomach muscles. I don't know how that works. But it was a big fish. It does not say whale. It does not say in the original Leviathan. And furthermore, the word Leviathan today is not used for whale. So that should tell you something, because real experts in Hebrew think and ponder, how can we express a modern day thing using hopefully a biblical word. They don't have to, they can make up a word, but they tried to make it a biblical Hebrew word for the first try. And today a Leviathan is not a whale, or possibly it's a sea monster. But the equivalent of dragons that swim in the sea, I don't even know what you call them. But in ancient literature, there were these dragons that lived in the sea. They sort of looked like a giant seahorse, but they would hop up and down in the waves. No, Patrice, just you know about these creatures. Anyway, they did believe in sea serpents. Yes, sea serpent, I guess. So that's a very quick and dirty answer to big fish, swallowed by a big fish. And the reason why, probably not a myth or a crazy person writing, is because it does happen in actual human life, that this has happened.
Yeah, the term that's actually used here reminds me of something that in one of my Hebrew classes, we were taught to help keep in mind certain Hebrew pronouns. We learned that in Hebrew, who is he is she, and what? Dog is fish.
So it's dog.
Dog, yeah, but I mean, and the Hebrew term here is dog gadol.
Dog gadol. And gadol is big. In fact,
Big
on my
fish, so.
beginning, this is one of my beginning Hebrew posters. Let me see how I can get it where you can see it.
There you go.
All right. So Aleph Beit Gimel Dalet is at the on the far right in your corner, and what is it? It's fishy. Dog.
Dog.
And the plural is dagim. But we like to laugh and say dog is fish. Dog is really kelef. Dog, not dog. Dog is kelef, which is Caleb. So, it's very confusing. No, it's not confusing.
But the first part is correct. Who is he? And he is she in Hebrew. So, anyhow.
Hey, now I'm having trouble with posters, so I'm really sorry I got one.
Are we ready for Havdalah?
I think we are. If we've answered all the questions, we had to skip a few,
Well,
because, we like to talking.
we'll mark that as done. Jenny, since we're back here and you're here, would you lead us through Havdalah?
Don't make her do it.
Thank you.
Why are you making her do it?
She responded very
Okay.
enthusiastically.
All right. Thank you, Jen.
All right, then you get the primary cup. I will get cups for the rest.
Do you need a beanie? A sombrero? A tam, you could do it, a tam o'shanter.
Okay, let
Other
me
kinds of.
get wine into that and water into the other.
Can I bring you a keeper?
Yeah, I'll look at it. I'll go get it. Just trying to remember.
Right. Okay, you found it, and I will. Fill those things.
Okay, step on it.
And step on it and fill it.
Problem with some people is when you tell them to go faster, they delight in going slower. I don't know if you know people like that. But it's interesting where you can talk about Job and Jonah in the same evening. It's like, okay. And tongues, yeah. It's like anything can happen time. Okay. There are a whole realm of answers we don't know. We have no answers for. So, we're just lucky that you keep asking us questions. We know some things about it. If you ask me about stock returns, I got nothing. No,
I've always wondered, I can never figure it out.
you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be mystery. I know. What does it say on it?
Yeshua HaMashiach.
I think that might have been one of John's older ones that was too floppy for him to wear.
Yeah, I think so.
Because those are made.
Turn it over and over.
Yeah.
Wait, no, that was last night's.
So confusing. Yeah, you might as well keep that, Jenny, because. All right, how can we set up this camera so that we can see her?
Jenny should take my seat.
Okay, and I will butt out. Well, we can sit at the table.
Yes, we'll sit at the table with you. There's that. That's ours. I have to bring her cup, and here are matches. And pour a little water in here. I'll bring the water to that.
Are you gonna give her a little one? Oh. It's being pokey. It's being pokey. Oh, he has to do
I said, you
He has to
get.
draw everything out. And do anything snip, snip. Just make it as long as possible.
So it's just Virginia and Dana.
Yeah, and who knows who else is out there.
Or
That was
watch it
interesting.
tomorrow.
I think I should put a little more water. Is that enough water?
Well,
Can we
I'm
go
gonna
slow?
add a little.
Oh, that's right, you're gonna add some. Okay.
Please go slower.
And we should mention for those of you who later view this, who are not part of, you know, for those of you who are not part of the synagogue and who may view this a little later, Jenny is one of our cantors, and since she is among us, we thought that it would be appropriate for her to lead us.
We're gonna torture her.
I'm used to it now.
Yeah, Shabbat is over, so back to work. Back to work for you.
Okay.
Yes, we're ready. Not too bad.
It's gonna be okay.
It's not too bad. Looks crooked though. Why does it look so crooked?
It looks, because I look crooked.
Yeah, because of this, the
Yeah, I just
angle
think
you
it's
have the
big.
camera
That's
at. Makes
Just
it
leave it,
look
or
crooked.
just-
Just leave it. They'll just, looks like the leaning candle
It does.
piece of.
All right, let's start.
Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. La 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 la. With joy we'll draw the living water from the well that never will run dry. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. La 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 la.
Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For God, the Lord, is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. Therefore, with joy will we draw water out of the wells of salvation. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. In the past, the Jews had light and joy, gladness and honor. So be it with us. I will lift up the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord. Lie, lie, la, 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 lie, 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 la, 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 lie, 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 lie. Lie, lie, la, 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 lie, 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 la, 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 lie, 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 la, 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 lie, lie. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Borei peri hagafen, borei peri hagafen. Amen. Lie, lie, la, 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 lie, 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 la, 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 lie, 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 la, 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 lie, 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 lie. Lie, lie, la, 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 lie, 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 la, 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 lie, 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 la, 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 lie, lie, lie. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Borei minei basami, borei minei basami. Amen. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Borei merei ha'esh, borei merei ha'esh. Amen. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Lie, 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 lie. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך. בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני Amavdil ben kodesh lechol. Amen. Lai lai la 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 lai lai. Lai la 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 lai lai. Lai la 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 lai lai. Lai lai la 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 lai lai. Lai la 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 lai. Lai la 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 lai lai. Okay, so what did we just say? Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates various kinds of spices. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the light of the fire. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who made a distinction between holy and common, between light and darkness, between Israel and the nations, between the seventh day and the 6 working days. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord, who distinguishes between holy and common. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Right. So now we'll drink up.
L'chaim.
Chaim. No sweet. All right. Are we reluctantly ready to say goodbye to Shabbat? Okay, don't do that.
Mazel tov.
I forgot to remind you
Yeah,
about that.
I always forget. Okay. All right.
That'll come out pretty easily.
I'm gonna hold on to this. Okay, so we'll carefully say goodbye to Shabbat. Bye-bye, Shabbat.
Bye-bye, Shabbat.
Bye-bye, Shabbat. Till next week.
You won't have ashes like floating in the
I'm
air.
sorry.
Keep it away.
All right, are we ready?
Yes.
Eliyahu Hanavi,
Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hagiladi. Imera Yavo Aleinu, Imera Yavo Aleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. La 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 la, la. Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov.
By the way, when
It
when
was
I
the
do-
leaning of Tower.
And now on
Shavua
now-
Tov. Love you all.
camera.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
put it away outside,
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
okay.
Shavuot Tov,
Shavua
everybody.
tov. Bye. Have a good month. I don't think we see you until October.